All right, today we are diving headfirst into the shadowy world of private armies. We're talking about private military and security companies, some of the most powerful and, yeah, most controversial forces in modern conflict. So let's break down how this massive multi-billion-dollar industry actually works.
You've probably seen images just like this one, highly trained operators in some far-off conflict zone. And your first thought is probably special forces. But here's the thing. More and more, these aren't soldiers from a national army. They work for private corporations. They're part of this huge industry that operates in the gray zones of global security, blurring the very lines of what we even consider warfare. So how are we going to unpack all this? Well, here's the game plan. First, we'll define what these shadow armies really are. Then, we'll tackle that really thorny question, are they just mercenaries? After that, we'll get into the business of conflict, weigh the pros and cons, and finally, look at what this all means for the future of war. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's start at square one. What exactly is a private military and security company, or PMSC for short? Well, the most widely used definition we have comes from something called the Montreux document, and it's simple, but it's absolutely crucial. They are private business entities providing military or security services. The key words there are private business. They are for-profit companies, not state armies, even when governments are their biggest clients. And make no mistake about it, this is not some small, niche market. We are talking about an industry that's projected to surge past $366 billion by 2028. This isn't a sideshow anymore. It's becoming a central part of the entire global security economy. This massive scale and the fact that they operate in combat zones, it inevitably brings up a very, very loaded term, mercenaries, right? Are these high-tech companies just a modern, corporatized version of the classic soldier for hire? Well, that word mercenary, it carries a lot of historical baggage, doesn't it? But you might be surprised to learn that in the eyes of international law, it's not just a loose label you can throw around. It's a very specific legal status with a really strict definition. And here's where it gets kinda wild. According to the Geneva Conventions, a person has to meet all 6 of these criteria to legally be classified as a mercenary. All 6. It's an incredibly high bar. So for example, if an American contractor is working for the US government, they often don't qualify. If they're a legal resident of the country they're operating in, nope, doesn't qualify. This strict checklist means that, legally speaking, most PMSC personnel manage to avoid that mercenary label. So if they're not technically mercenaries, what in the world do they actually do? Well, this is a global industry that does way, way more than just guard duty. The services these companies offer are incredibly diverse. I mean, just look at this list. Their services really cover the entire spectrum of conflict. You've got the stuff you'd expect, like direct combat support and training foreign armies. But then there's all the back-end stuff, the complex logistics and IT support needed to keep a modern military running. They protect VIPs, they guard critical infrastructure, they gather intelligence, and they even handle post-conflict jobs like clearing minefields. They've basically become a one-stop shop for modern security. And this industry is home to some seriously infamous names. On one side, you've got companies like the American firm Academi, which you probably know by its old name, Blackwater. Founded by an ex-Navy SEAL, it became a huge contractor for the US government, but got dragged into massive controversy in Iraq. And on the other side, you have groups like Russia's Wagner Group, which pretty much acts as an unofficial arm of the state. It's been linked to human rights abuses all over the world, and its leader, you might remember, died in a mysterious plane crash right after a failed rebellion. So you have these incredibly powerful private actors who are accountable more to their shareholders than to citizens. And as you can imagine, that sparks a really fierce debate. So let's actually weigh the arguments for and against using them. The case for these companies often boils down to pragmatism. Supporters will argue that the private sector is just more efficient and that can save taxpayer money. They offer incredible flexibility, this surge capacity that lets governments quickly deploy elite specialists without all the military red tape. And then there's the grim political calculation. When a private contractor dies, it almost never causes the same public and political outrage as when a uniformed soldier falls. But the case against them is powerful. Critics point out that the profit motive is a really dangerous foundation for security. It can lead to cutting corners on safety, on training, and it puts financial gain way above ethical concerns. These companies often operate in this legal gray area with way less oversight than a national military. And maybe the most disturbing argument of all is that their business model thrives on conflict. Peace, after all, is bad for the bottom line, which creates this twisted incentive to keep conflicts going.
You know, what's really fascinating is that this debate over motivation, it's not new. Not at all. 500 years ago, the political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli basically warned that soldiers fighting for a paycheck are useless and dangerous. Why? Because their loyalty is ultimately to their wallet, not to you or your cause. And this isn't just some dusty old philosophical concern.
It has had absolutely tragic real-world consequences. Take the infamous 2004 ambush in Fallujah, Iraq, where 4 Blackwater contractors were killed. Investigations later linked that tragedy directly to the company's decision to cut costs by using fewer guys and unarmored vehicles for a high-risk mission. The drive for profit had a fatal price tag.
So, no matter where you stand on this debate, one fact is just undeniable. We are firmly in an era of privatized warfare, and its growth has been nothing short of explosive. This chart tells the story perfectly. Just look at the period right after the Cold War, in the early 90s. The number of these private military companies just skyrockets. It went from just a few hundred to well over 1,000. The business of war essentially went corporate.
And the impact on the actual battlefield is just as stark. You can see here that historically, the ratio of contractors to soldiers in U.S. wars was pretty low. But then look at the numbers for the Balkans, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The ratio hit 1-to-1, and in Afghanistan, it actually went past it. I mean, think about that for a second. For every single U.S. soldier on the ground, there was at least one private contractor there too.
So the huge question is, why? Why did this happen? Well, it wasn't an accident. It was basically a perfect storm of 3 major global trends. First, after the Cold War, militaries downsized like crazy, creating this huge supply of highly trained veterans looking for work. Second, you had the rise of new threats like terrorism that created new security demands that traditional armies just weren't built for. And third, all of this was happening during a global political shift that favored privatizing and outsourcing government functions, even, as it turns out, war itself. This whole trend leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. We've seen the arguments for efficiency on one side and the dangers of a profit-driven war on the other. So, what if we took this trend to its ultimate conclusion? If we outsourced national defense completely, would the free market really make the world a safer place? Or would it just turn war into a permanent, profitable business with no end in sight? That's the question we're left with.